Hello my friends, I'm Rich Larson and I'm the IRC Tire Guy. Today we are talking splatters, specifically no kicker splatters, learning how to get that propulsion off of the ground and directly into the rear tire, into that obstacle, splatting that rear tire into the obstacle. This is a very technical maneuver. It's an advanced maneuver. There's a lot of little things that I want you guys to have dialed before you go jumping into this. That being said, let me break down what a splatter is. As you guys know, I break down the double blip a lot. Double blip, jab zap, learning how to run the front tire into the obstacle, 2 blips of the clutch and throttle, 1 to get the front tire into the air, a second to propel you up and over the obstacle. Learning that double blip skill and all the little pieces of that are a huge piece of your splatter approach. That's why I preach the double blip so much. It's because it really is an essential piece of everything that you want to learn on a motorcycle. That being said, a splatter is a little bit different. Essentially, you're going directly off of the ground, possibly off of a small kicker, rock, obstacle, and into the obstacle, basically splattering your rear tire into the face of the obstacle, missing the front tire completely. And that's very important. You have to miss the front tire completely. Commit to the rear tire, almost like you're trying to do a backflip, slam or splatter that rear tire into the obstacle, hold pressure and hold traction over the top. So hopefully that clears up what a splatter is, and I want to break down exactly the best way to learn how to get your splatter skill dialed in today. So first, I want to start with the on, off, out, in. This is something I've preached so many times on this channel, learning the quick descending RPM, on, off, out, in with the clutch, the coordination that it takes to do that. I will say you can get away with a double blip, maybe a splatter to an extent with all throttle. But really what you're doing is just bashing into the obstacle, and you're not really using the proper form and technique that the trials and the top hard enduro athletes do. Now, I did a video breaking down, showing the top guys like Tony Bow, Manny Lettenbichler, Mitch Brightmore, doing the on, off, out, in, learning how to get the front tire into the air clean with that clutch up, basically turning the throttle off completely before their front tire is even into the air. You can check it out right here. That being said, make sure you have that skill dialed. Even set up a camera and take a look at your hands. Are you turning the throttle completely off before you let that clutch out when you're practicing those quick descends of RPM? Make sure you're doing that proper. You're not turning the throttle and letting out the clutch at the same time. The important piece of this understanding is learning how to load the flywheel. That's what we're doing. We're creating potential energy within the engine. Everything that's moving, the piston, the clutch, the transmission, and the flywheel itself, storing that energy and then transferring all of that energy to the rear tire efficiently. The goal with the loading the flywheel technique is to roll the throttle off, catch the descending RPM, and release the clutch. Now, the next piece of your splatter technique is practicing the loading the flywheel technique. And that's what I want to show you guys right now. So starting with the loading the flywheel technique, this is a very simple practice, but it's very effective. And this really is going to help you wrap your head around how we're harnessing the downspin of the engine. It's very, very important to get this 100% dialed, and this is the safest way to start that learning process. So as you can see here, we have a slight uphill, and essentially the goal of this is to ride up this hill with nothing but dispersing power, or basically using all the downspin of the engine and clutch to get you out. So what we're gonna do here is, as we come into it, we're gonna hold the bike pretty much wide open. The clutch is in, and we're coasting into the face of this small hill. Right when your front tire starts to make contact with the apex and transition of that hill, you reduce the throttle completely and let out the clutch to pull you up the face of this hill. It's gonna sound something like this. Rolling in, coasting. All downspin of RPM. And all clutch there. As you guys can see, my throttle is completely off right when my front tire drives into the obstacle, and I just let the clutch out, and let it pull me up this hill. I pull the clutch in slightly at the top and continue forward as we transition over the top of the obstacle. We're coming in fast enough to maintain balance and control, but not fast enough to just coast up the hill. From there, I hold the bike wide open, the clutch is completely in and we're coasting. Then I let the throttle completely off and let the clutch out to roll up the hill. So before my front tire makes contact with the uphill, I'm chopping the throttle completely, then letting out the clutch up the face. Getting the confidence and kind of wrapping your head around the understanding of the loaded flywheel and then delivering that downspin of power, the potential energy that you're building within your engine, delivering that to the rear tire to help you up an obstacle is that first steps towards your splatter. Again, this is all going to come together as we move forward. So let's move on to the next drill. Here we go. All right, guys, the next part of this drill is going to be practicing your clutch up with a little bit more aggression. This is essentially using the loading the flywheel technique to get the front tire into the air. Again, what we're trying to get you guys to do is get comfortable using a lot of RPM. This is a very dangerous technique, I will say, because you're using so much power, but the understanding of turning the throttle off and letting the clutch out creates that safety. But if you don't have the coordination to do that, like I said, I suggest you get 100% dialed in with your on-off out in technique and make sure that you've got your clutch up 100% as well. We need to have that ability first before we step to this. Now, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to a wide open throttle, completely chop, front brake in, knees to the radiators. As you get that suspension compression and rebound, with the rebound, simultaneously you'll release front brake and clutch at the same time. Remember, the throttle is completely off here. We're again using the down spin, the loaded flywheel to get the front tire into the air. Here we go, wide open. Just like that. That wasn't too bad. Now we can close those and tighten those up a little so the bike doesn't completely stall. Here we go, wide open. Just like that. As you can see there, that's all downspin RPM that gets the front tire into the air. There's zero throttle there. My throttle's completely off. One more time. It's downspin of throttle as well as suspension compression rebound body position. But getting comfortable using that downspin of RPM will really assist you as we start to continue forward within your splatter technique. Like I said, make sure you've got the first bits of your clutch up down before you go committing to that wide open throttle. Because if you don't have the coordination and you leave the throttle wide open, you're probably gonna do a backflip, and we don't want that, right? So now we're gonna move on to our first approach of an obstacle. Let me show you. All right, the next part of this drill is going to be using an obstacle like this one. We have a telephone pole with a little bit of dirt up it. You can use a sharp, even dirt mound to get a little bit of loft off of. Now, the goal here is to be able to land rear tire first every single time. I'm using the exact same on, off, out, in clutch off of the face of the obstacle, lofting the front tire, jumping both front and rear, and landing rear tire every single time. The goal here is to be able to do it on command. You should feel comfortable landing on your rear tire on flat ground first before you go committing to a splatter. Just like this. We'll do it both directions, nice and smooth. Just like that. Learning how to be comfortable with that front and or that rear tire landing first. Just like that. Really simple. We're not looking for big speed or big air at this point. Just like that. Repetitions there and finding comfort in that rear tire landing first as well as lofting the front is what we're looking for. We really want to have that dialed in control as we approach that. The repetitions there will be huge for your comfort as we start to get into kickers. So make sure to get that 100% dialed in. Let's move on to the next. All right, the next piece of your splatter approach is going to be using a log similar to this one. We have no dirt up the face. It's a decent sized log. We're on the larger side of a telephone pole, you know, maybe 12 inches around. The goal here is getting comfortable with driving your rear tire into this obstacle and missing your front tire completely. So really, this is how I would hit a log this size at speed. If I was going quite a bit faster, if I had a long run in into the log, I wouldn't double blip it. I would just go directly to that rear tire. It takes a good amount of aggression and an early delivery of power, and it's also very imperative you get your body position dialed in here. As you can see, I get my front tire into the air early, and I'm really thinking about driving my feet into the obstacle. My feet match the angle of my machine as my rear tire drives in. I'm also not leaning completely back. If you're too far back, you're going to get compression and rebound, and it's going to kick you forward. You've got to be very centered, straight leg position, head forward in front of the bars a little bit as we drive our rear tire hard into this obstacle. As I said, this is a great way to hit logs like this one at speed. If you've got a downed log on a trail, or if you're racing endurocross, it's a common thing that you have a run in before the obstacle. And double blipping it actually takes a little bit longer to get set up, and it slows you down. This is just aggression and driving that rear tire hard into the face of the obstacle. This is also exactly how a splatter is going to feel after you get the loft off the small obstacle and you drive the rear or splatter the rear tire into the face of whatever obstacle you're practicing on. So getting comfortable with this rear tire drive into this obstacle on flat ground first is going to be a key piece to your confidence in your splatter approach. So I'm going to show you. Nice and smooth here. I would start slow. Nice and slow at first. As you start to get more and more comfortable with it, you go a little faster. Just like that. The goal here would be to work your way up. A little faster, a little faster. The faster you go, obviously the more suspension, compression, rebound, the more reaction you're gonna get out of that bike, and the more in tune with your body position you need to be. This is a great step for the comfort it takes to get the body position in the correct spot for your splatters. Let's move on to the next drill. All right, so the next piece of this drill is getting comfortable with what I call a tire tap. Essentially, if you have a kicker or a jump, even that is big enough to propel you all the way to the top of the obstacle or up and over the obstacle, it's not necessarily a splatter. I always say it's more of a tire tap or really just a jump. This is a perfect example of that. We have a rock here that you can get plenty of propulsion off of. If I really tried, I could just jump over the whole thing. But what I'm trying to do is precision place my rear tire on the top of this obstacle. So you can find a log or two logs and learn how to kind of jump one and tap that rear tire on the other. As you can see here, we roll in nice and smooth, and we tire tap the rear. Just like that. It's not necessarily a splatter. Learning the precision of the rear. A little bit of power. Again, getting you guys comfortable with the placement of the rear tire. Now, from here, the goal would be to find a safe obstacle. We have a perfect pipe right here, and I want to show you guys the exact next steps to get you dialed in on this splatter. All right, guys, as you can see here, we have a nice pipe with dirt on the backside. Essentially, the dirt on the backside is, in my opinion, pretty important. That way you guys don't have to think about holding pressure and keeping that front tire high as you drive over the top of the pipe. Really, you can just kind of ride over it at this point, and this is going to give you a little more confidence and control to focus on your splatter technique. Now, we have a nice big kicker here. You want to start really big. As I said earlier, we have a nice big rock and we were kind of just learning how to tire tap. You can also do that exact same thing on a log double, learning how to place that rear tire. As the obstacle you're trying to splatter gets bigger and bigger, it becomes more and more important to commit to the rear tire, really getting that front tire into the air. So let's talk a little bit about your throttle and clutch timing as it pertains to splatters. Now, similar to the previous drill where we were focusing on landing rear tire heavy, we're still trying to get that on, off, out, in, off the face of the obstacle or off the face of the kicker when it comes to a splatter. But what you're going to find is as the obstacle gets bigger and bigger, those on, off with the throttle and out, in with the clutch are going to get closer and closer together. I'd even say that on the bigger obstacles, you're actually releasing the clutch a little bit earlier, but you're still reducing the throttle. If you can focus on getting that reduction of throttle off the face of the kicker, it's going to allow the bike to get a little bit more bite and a little bit more traction and pop off of the ground. So there's a big amount of power delivery to assist that front tire up into the air, that loft of the front tire, as well as body position. You can see as I go off the kicker, I'm really straightening out. I'm focusing on driving my feet into the obstacle and straightening out, getting my head forward and assisting that front tire into the air and driving that rear tire into the obstacle. You can see every time, I've mentioned this before, my feet match the angle of the bike, and that's very important. Once again, we have a big kicker here, and that's gonna give you confidence when you're first learning this. Nice centered position, nice and smooth, just like that. Now, as you can see there, I barely needed any power and I almost jumped over the whole obstacle. The faster you go on a splatter, the more your suspension is going to absorb the kicker rather than react to the kicker. So it's very important that you learn how to get that maximum reaction off of the obstacle. And the way you do that is reduce your speed. That's gonna allow that suspension to really compress and rebound off the face of the obstacle, giving you more propulsion. As you get more comfortable using the larger kicker, the next step is to make that kicker smaller and smaller, or use the same kicker and make the obstacle bigger and bigger. Understanding the smaller the kicker is, the more power, suspension, compression and rebound, body position and timing, precision with everything together, the more important all of those things become. So let's move on to some different obstacles. So as you can see here, this wall is the perfect progression for your splatter technique, and finding something similar to this, or essentially working your way to something similar like this in the wild, is going to be the best approach. Starting with a big kicker and then learning how to make it smaller and smaller and smaller. As you guys can see here, I'm actually doing the majority of this wall with no kicker. I'm doing it just straight off of the ground. All basically flat ground. I've got a little bit of a rut from practicing it over and over, but the minimal kicker creates the confidence when I'm out in the gnarly situations. I'm also focusing, when there's no lift, on squeezing the bike with my toes, pointing my toes into the frame, holding my feet as tight as I can to the frame to help just assist a little bit in getting that bike off of the ground. Now, to find that efficiency, you need to use all forms of control. I'm using my brakes to actually assist that suspension compression and rebound. You can even see sometimes I'm actually locking my front tire up completely before the front tire leaves the ground. I'm just trying to find that maximum amount of suspension compression and looking for every extra way to get just that much more. I've worked my way through this entire obstacle to the final rung of 4 telephone poles stacked, and I couldn't get it with no kicker. The smallest I was able to get up it on was a rock about this big. We have about 3 inches here, giving me as much propulsion as I could, but I still kind of touched linkage on the top, whereas the previous kicker, which was maybe 4 or 5 inches, I was able to get all the way up and over. My whole point of this is I'm always searching for my limits. I'm always trying to find how small of a kicker, how big of an obstacle, how gnarly can we get? And that understanding and that approach can really create progression in your riding. Maybe you're comfortable doing it off of a big rock onto a big obstacle, but find out, can you do it off of flat ground? Do you have the maximum understanding of the loading the flywheel technique to find that maximum propulsion? It's so key, and it's a tough technique to get dialed in. I hope that progression helps you guys a little bit and helps you find that confidence in your ability within your splatters. I hope you guys are enjoying the channel. If you are, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, as well as follow us on Instagram at IRC Moto, my personal Instagram page at RichLarson511. And until next time, keep shredding.